I expect that in the UK we will also, in the end, see a variety of different kinds of nationalist personalities coming out of the Brexit and its aftermath. The brand is called Anglo-American conservatism. It should be especially interesting to English and British audiences because the first chapter of the book begins in the 1400s with the great common law thinker John Fortescue, and then continues through a star-studded cast of English luminaries. And the heart of this tradition is a tradition that rejects the idea of universal rationalism. It rejects the idea that we get from Enlightenment rationalist thinkers like John Locke, that there's one universal political truth that applies to all nations at all times, and it also rejects the universalism of the Protestant revolutionaries who thought that there was a universal Christianity, a Christian government that could be imposed. So this great common law tradition gives us a view into a form of human life and human flourishing that's based on a connection to the past and to the future, something I think many people are missing today.
And when would you say we started missing it? When did we lose this tradition? What obscured it? Is it something that's happened in the recent future, the recent past, rather?
Well, let's begin with the immediate recent past, because I think that way at least maybe there will be something that many of us can agree on, which is that somewhere around the year 2020, the old hegemony of liberal ideas, which had dominated British and American and European life at least since the Second World War, seems to have collapsed, and there's a new sheriff in town, which we can call woke neo-Marxism or give it some other name, and it's certainly not liberalism. And at this point, it's rapidly going through public and private institutions. And I think the question that everyone needs to be asking right now is there a force that is capable of stopping this rolling cultural revolution? My argument is that liberalism couldn't stop it. If it had been able to, then this wouldn't have happened. And so we need to investigate older forms of life that were certainly well known before the Second World War, in which human beings are understood as by nature members of families, communities, tribes and nations, something that's been suppressed.
Do you think that life was better for most people in such? If we're talking about before the war, do you think that on average people were happier, people were more secure, people understood their own lives better?
Look, that's a good question, and it's a difficult one. I don't know if I can't pretend to know the answer, because there were so many changes with the Industrial Revolution that really did dramatically affect people's lives, and it may be that people were happier in some ways than in others, but I think that if we take this as a very, very general, basic question, the great sociologist Durkheim already 120 years ago was researching the question of why people commit suicide, and he argued that statistically suicide is much more prevalent in atomized, individualized societies, that where people are part of a hierarchy. He was talking about Catholic traditional societies. He also talked about Jewish traditional societies, and he said that where there are traditions being handed down within families and congregations, that people have a place, and in general they're happier. And this is a very similar argument to what you hear, for example, from writers like Jordan Peterson talking about young boys, or Abigail Shrier talking about young women, who today are mustering statistics to make the same argument, that it's the do whatever makes you feel good, give meaning to your own life, be independent, think for yourself, that there's apparently a limit to how much of that people can take before they get stuck and they don't want to think anything anymore.
So, I mean, I guess, so I mean, to paraphrase, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, you think that liberal democracy, over the rise of liberal democracy, with a focus on the liberal part there, has sort of promoted ideas of freedom, of individual choice, which have sort of watered down the duties and responsibilities that people have to each other, and sort of broken down conservative ideas that before that had lasted throughout the ages and kind of held people together. Is that a fair summary?
It's a fair summary. I'm not particularly a critic of democracy. I like democracy, and but I do think that that the kind of democracy that was familiar when Christianity was still the major force in society, it was a very different kind of democracy, because the framework in which people lived was a framework in which there were basic assumptions that that you get married, that you serve in the military, that you have children, that you take care of your parents in old age, and that kind of a society is a society in which people have many brothers and sisters and many cousins, and at this point, people from all parts of the spectrum, are talking about the crisis, the plague of loneliness, and a large part of this loneliness is that even if you want to get married, you have trouble staying married, and young people put off having children. They put off, in fact, any kind of commitment, because they see how difficult it is to hold a marriage together. And I think many people have written about this, but very few have entered into the question of, what is traditional society actually like? What is it that makes the difference? So, for example, I think one of the central arguments in the book is that the biblical concept of giving honor to your parents is the basis for traditional societies. And you don't just give honor to your parents; you give honor to older people, to teachers, to commanders, to government. You give honor to your husband. You give honor to your wife. And the question is, if you've been raised to constantly ask, is this working for me? That's a completely different question than the traditional question of, am I giving honor to my wife? And it turns out that if you're not giving honor to your wife, that is, if you're absolutely honest with her, you always tell her what you're thinking, and that means that you probably criticize her 10 or 20 times as often as your grandfather would have criticized his wife. And guess what? That's actually terribly hurtful. It may be that you feel those things are true, but it doesn't mean that you'll be able to keep your marriage together. So, yeah, go ahead.
No. I mean, where does this leave people for whom those traditional structures simply don't work? Like, I understand. Let's be straight. I understand how this perhaps works for me. I have a happy marriage. I have a good relationship with my father. I have a good relationship with my children. I'm sure we could all use to respect each other a bit more. But for people who aren't going to fit inside those kinds of structures, the kind of structures that existed in the time period you were talking about, people who are gay, people who have marriages that simply aren't going to survive, people who have lousy parents, who aren't going to treat them well. How does a return to these kind of values do anything other than seriously impinge on, well, I was going to say their liberty, but that's the wrong word, their happiness?
Well, look, there's that's the question that's always asked. And I certainly don't mean to say that there aren't parents who are abusive, and I'm not campaigning to give honor to your abusive parents. But I think realistically that question comes up, in every single audience. And my impression is that it's not a hypothetical question. It's not people saying, how can I honor my parents if they were abusive? What's actually going on is that most young people, given the opportunity, being told that they should honor, that when they're adults, they should continue throughout life to honor their parents, they seek the escape valve of saying, oh, well, I can criticize my parents, they don't deserve to be honored. And the argument is not about, what the 1% who are really abused in childhood should be like. The argument is about how should the 60 or 70 or 80% of young people who have been taught that at the age of 18 or 20 you move away from your family, you see your parents maybe once or twice a year, you speak to them on the phone once a month. You don't owe them honor, you don't owe them grandchildren, you don't owe them anything. And I think that we've created not an entire world of genuinely abused children with a genuine question. We've created a world of children who think that criticizing their parents and dismissing their parents and coming up with excuses for why they should cut their ties with their parents and not learn anything from them, that is the norm. And so the argument needs to be, not about how do we treat the borderline cases, the minority who are really suffering. I think we can have interesting conversations about that. But right now we're talking about the majority living without norms, and what should be the norms that people should want.
What would you make of, for example, which we had in this country, the conservative argument for same-sex marriage? Because same-sex marriage in this country was brought in by a conservative government, and the argument made for it was that if marriage promotes stability, it should be something that can promote stability in a broader range of relationships. Would that fit within the kind of conservative tradition you're talking about?
Well, look, I don't see that there's been an improvement in marriage since same-sex marriage was legalized. I mean, there has been for people in same-sex marriages because they're now involved in it. No,
their situation is surely improved.
I'm sorry, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. I think that an institution like marriage can only propagate and only benefit people when it's a norm, when the overwhelming majority of people encourage and support the continuation of that norm. In the context of that kind of society, it's possible that a same-sex couple who get married, where the institution of marriage is extremely strong, then they might be able to benefit. But right now, we're talking about marriage as an institution collapsing absolutely everywhere, and the fear of committing, the lack of understanding of what it would take to make it work, the fear of having children and the small number of children being born, and the lack of knowledge about how to raise children, which you can't get out of books, all of these things create an environment in which nobody is benefiting. It doesn't matter if you're heterosexual or homosexual. The marriages created under these circumstances are extremely weak, and a great many of them can't make it even through a few years. And so I think that rather than focusing on gays, who I think at the moment are probably not very discriminated against, I think we need to be focusing more on the question of why is it that a young man and a young woman who get married can't keep the marriage together. And outside of joining a traditional community in which they get to see on a regular basis, they get to interact with people who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s who actually have kept their marriages together. They don't have any. There are no models. There's nobody to imitate. And so, the whole discussion about let's spread marriage to additional communities is absurd, because our problem is making marriage possible even for the standard routine, what used to be a standard routine marriage.
How important is faith to this sort of conservatism, and are all faiths equally good in that regard?
Well, I don't know enough about Islam or Hinduism to speak for them. I mean, my inclination is to suppose that they could be very good, but mostly what I know is about biblical traditions, about Christianity and Judaism. I myself am an Orthodox Jew, and I live in an Orthodox community with like 15 synagogues in our neighborhood. My wife and I have 9 children and 3 grandchildren, and we intentionally, consciously, when we were in college, which is a generation ago, we decided that we wanted to seek out a traditional community, and at the beginning, our goal, and in my book Conservatism: A Rediscovery, I included a chapter about this story of me and my wife when we were 18 and how we decided to live a conservative life. That's very unusual for me, but I decided it was fair for people to hear where this is coming from. And this decision was not initially a decision based on faith in God. It was a decision based on our visiting and being impressed with the kind of society that exists in Orthodox Christian and Jewish communities. And I think that the issue of faith is it's important, but it's not as central as people always think, because
Sure.
when you approach a traditional community from a position not as an outside critic, but as someone who wants to learn, when you do that, over the years, you come to think very differently about what the meanings of all sorts of words are. And the best way, I think, if somebody's interested in discovering God, the best way to do that is not through meditation or anything that you do by yourself, but through the life of a traditional community. So in the end, I think God and Scripture are crucial, but they're not crucial as a first step. As a first step, the most important thing is to join the life of conservation and transmission in such a community.
Let's talk for a moment about nationalism and nation states. I think you believe that the horrors of the Second World War distorted our view of nationalism as a concept, made it seem more malign than it was. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I also know that you applauded Britain for returning to national self-determination after Brexit. Yes. I'm interested to know how far that extends. Would you encourage Scotland to achieve national self-determination from the UK? Would you encourage California to split off from the United States? Where does that end?
Well, look, my book on nationalism it's not a utopia. There's no mathematical formula. The answer as to which nations should be independent and when is something that requires a lot of practical consideration. So my wife and I did visit Scotland a number of years ago. I have to admit that like many other non-Brits, I saw Braveheart and was excited about Scottish nationalism. And then when Yael and I spent 2 weeks in Scotland, we admittedly not a scientific survey, but I talked to everyone I could about it, and virtually everyone who said that they were for Scottish independence immediately said that they wanted to join the European Union. And so it seemed to me that really what they were saying was that they'd rather exchange the dominant English nation down south for the dominant German nation, and my sympathy somewhat evaporated. I mean, that's not independence, and so if the Scots don't want independence, then maybe the 400-year alliance with England is not as bad as they think.
Okay. Look, before I let you go, what do you think about Donald Trump running for attempting to run for the presidency again? Because Donald Trump is often seen as something of a hero to conservatives, yet he strikes me as a deeply, deeply unconservative individual who really doesn't stand for many of the things you're talking about. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, no, you're definitely not wrong about it. I mean, Donald Trump was and is an outsider personality. And he did a great service for politics in America and in other countries by challenging the bipartisan free trade consensus, which had dominated for 30 years and was erasing borders throughout Europe and the world. So he contributed all sorts of important things. Whether whether conservative voters are going to choose him over somebody like Ron DeSantis, who has similar views, that remains to be seen. I mean, one of the achievements of Donald Trump's presidency is that there are now increasing numbers of nationalists of different kinds. Some of them I like better, some of them I like worse, on the American right, and I expect that in the UK we will also, in the end, see a variety of different kinds of nationalist personalities coming out of the Brexit and its aftermath.